Good day, everyone. This video is about the scientific status of unconscious processes by Drew Western. In 1993, English professor Frederick Roos argued that psychoanalysis has proved to be an indifferently successful and vastly inefficient method of removing neurotic symptoms and produces more converts than cures. He further asserts that psychoanalysis theory is without significant experimental support. So, the central theme of the article is unconscious thoughts, feelings, and motivations. In terms of the content, the article has three parts. The first portion distinguishes between unconscious cognition and memory, which may be retrieved and altered, and those represented in behavior without conscious knowledge. The second part explores unconscious effects from amnesic patients feeling toward objects that they cannot remember seeing, the discrepancy between people's conscious racial attitudes and the unconscious associations that guide their behavior when their conscious values are not activated. Lastly, the third section examines unconscious motivation, indicating that motives activated outside of awareness influence behavior and have distinct developmental origins.
15 years ago, models on consciousness showed memory as the process of bringing thoughts into consciousness. Today, evidence and models viewed memory as a multi stage process involving a series of memory stores. This include initial sensory registration, or the memory that lasts a flash of an instant, short term memory, a roughly 30-second 7 item memory, or when we try to dial a phone number, and lastly, the long term memory, which can last a lifetime. Cognitive scientists agree that thought and memory involves at least two systems, one explicit and the other implicit. Things that we consciously recall or remember are stored in the explicit memory, such as one's own personal past, formulas, or the name of a friend. Whereas implicit memory, also known as unconscious, refers to the information that we unintentionally store and retain, and we cannot bring that memory into awareness. Another evidence for unconscious cognitive processes is the procedural memory. This is a type of implicit memory which is essentially involved when performing different actions and skills. Example of this may include typing on a keyboard, tying your shoes, and writing with a pen. While demonstrating these acts is simple, giving an explanation on how they carry out these procedures can be considerably much more difficult. Another kind of implicit memory is associative memory. This refers to our ability to recall how two words or concepts are related. Primary experiments have been used to study associative memory, wherein subjects are exposed to a word or image which is designed to automatically trigger associated thoughts or ideas. For example, exposing someone to the word blue or any object that is blue can increase the likelihood that they will notice blueberries first when they look at a basket full of fruits. Priming works with our unconscious responses to alter our patterns and reactions by tapping into how our brain was able to store and recall information. The evidences presented have implications for the psychoanalytic understanding of our unconscious processes. First, procedural knowledge can never literally be made conscious because it is not stored as semantic statements, pictures, or other forms that may be represented in consciousness. Despite the lack of consciousness of association, activated beliefs, and representations, they can significantly influence conscious thought and behavior. Lastly, activated and relatively inaccessible representations can be differentiated in terms of degree rather than a categorical distinction, since the former has a stronger influence on behavior and outside awareness than the latter.
Okay, so the next part will be the evidence for unconscious affective processes. So the presence of unconscious cognitive processes in psychology has dwindled down or has minimized after 100-year opposition to the concept. However, the same does not apply to the existence of unconscious affective and motivational processes. The following experimental evidence suggests that these processes might be unconscious and are significant in human mental activity. Okay, so the first will be on neurological data. Neurological cases suggest that the neural circuitry for affective associative learning is distinct from the neural circuitry for conscious explicit learning. People with hippocampal lesions, for instance, can find it difficult to connect two events because their conscious memory is compromised, but they nevertheless will react emotionally as if they do. Evidence by Zajong suggests that affective evaluations can precede much cognitive processing. The dichotic experiment procedure by Wilson in 1975 showed that subjects lean toward familiar stimuli, making them develop affective preferences outside of awareness towards stimuli they had never consciously registered. Such phenomena happen since affect is processed through at least two parallel pathways. One runs from the thalamus to the amygdala and makes an instant response based on innate reactions, conditioned responses, and familiarity. The second pathway, on the other hand, has a sophisticated cortical analysis of the meaning of the stimulus. The second will be on the conditioning phenomena and unconscious affective processing. So in 1951, Lazarus and McCleary aimed to produce a conditioned anxiety response by pairing nonsense syllables or conditioned stimuli with a mild electric shock. As a result, the subjects still elicited a galvanic skin response even though they did not see the electric shock. Studies like this suggest that people unknowingly learn to associate aspects of situations with pleasant or unpleasant feelings. This leads to people approaching or avoiding other people or situations similar to their past experiences, regardless if there is no link between those cues and the memories that left this affective precipitates. The third one is unconscious prejudice. According to this, conscious and unconscious racial attitudes are uncorrelated, since conscious attitudes influence behavior only if they are attended to. If they are not attended, people's unconscious affective associations will guide their actions. This can be explained by the study of Fazio and colleagues, which revealed that subjects who associated black people to negative words have been rated or seen as not friendly. But when these people or subjects were asked about the Rodney King beating and the ensuing riots in Los Angeles, their unconscious associations did not predict their conscious attitudes. Study conducted by Steele showed the separation between conscious and unconscious feelings. In his projective test, he asked he asked his subjects to complete word stems like lo, la, and the with whatever words first came to mind. Black students who were his subjects completed these stems with words reflecting low conscious self-esteem. Examples of these words include the words loser, lazy, and dumb. The fourth one is the psychoanalytically inspired studies relevant to unconscious affect. A study by McGinnis showed how information is evaluated for its affective content. He demonstrated that, first, people tend to recognize neutral words faster than taboo words when shown briefly on a screen, and second, is that skin conductance or GSR is higher during presentation of the taboo words before conscious recognition of them. This can be explained by a study by Blum in 1954 in which he found that people are aware of potentially dangerous information even though they are unable to consciously perceive it. Participants in Blum's study noted that the threatening images stood out the most, despite merely catching a glance of them. They are also particularly watchful to them even though they cannot consciously perceive those words. Furthermore, Silverman and his colleagues have demonstrated that subliminal presentation of stimuli hypothesized to be psychodynamically meaningful affects an extensive set of behaviors. For example, male individuals who were subliminally exposed to the stimulus "beating dad is okay" performed better on a competitive dart-throwing activity versus subjects who were exposed to the control stimulus "being a doctor is okay." The fifth evidence will show the unconscious affect and defensive processes. The work by Vaillant is the most prominent work in this area. He found out that reliably scored defenses have many predictable correlates longitudinally and at a single time. Davidson and McGregor in 1995 also empirically operationalized defense mechanisms. Their study showed that self-reports of subjects or people with low overall defensiveness tend to correlate well with descriptions of them by others who know them well. However, the same cannot be said for defensive subjects, who do not view themselves as others see them.
There have been studies on self reports and physiological indices of sexual arousal that provide additional evidence of unconscious affect and defense. One of these is the study by Adams, Wright, and Lohr in 1996, which was able to provide evidence for the psychoanalytic theory of homophobia as a defense against threatening homosexual feelings, when it was found that the penile circumference of male subjects who identified as homophobic increased, which indicated arousal, while watching men have homosexual sex. One empirical evidence of repression is the study by Williams in 1994. It followed women who had been treated at the hospital for sexual molestation when they were children. 17 years after the documented abuse, 38% were amnesic of the incidents. This shows that there is a dynamic unconscious process of defensive memory reconstruction as the victims repress or forget the incident. The study by John and Robbins in 1994 provided evidence of narcissism. Based on the observation of MBA students, the study found that people narcissistically rank themselves 2 to 3 times higher than their peers and interdependent observers. On the other hand, the study by Robbins and Beer in 1996 was able to provide evidence for self enhancement as a defense. Based on the comparison of two groups of college freshmen, with one group being defensively self enhancing, with self reported academic competence and expectations of how they would perform well in college, the self enhancers were consciously pleased with their performance than the realistic group at the end of their sophomore year, and their science defense were manifested in their behavior. Dozier and Kobach's 1992 study on the defensive processes in adults with avoidant attachment styles, who are also defensive about their feelings in close relationships, were asked individuals about their memories with attachment figures while monitoring their skin conductance. Results showed that the more subjects used avoidance strategies, the more physiological reactivity manifested while they answered questions about separations, rejections, and parental threats. So there are four implications for the psychoanalytic understanding of unconscious processes. The first, considerable affective processing occurs unconsciously in our daily lives. People can protect themselves against unconsciously threatening thoughts and feelings by altering them outside of awareness. Second, affective processing occurs outside of awareness regardless of whether the person is responding defensively. People may not know what they feel because they are unaware of the unconscious associations that trigger their effects. Third, these studies have a bearing on what it means to remember a traumatic event. A traumatic memory can be sensory and verbal or other degrees of unconscious representation. It may also be encoded as a procedural memory or to behave in a particular way due to a particular circumstance, or it also may be encoded in both ways. Therapeutic work should be aimed at retrieving the conscious representations of the event and altering the automatically elicited feelings and ways of regulating those feelings. The fourth implication allows for experimental grounding for the use of psychoanalytic techniques. This is more treatment specific, as effective association can occur through the classical conditioning process without any cortical and conscious involvement. This means that people respond to stimulations and pattern ways unknowingly based on prior experiences.
Since a defense is by definition a motivated unconscious effort to either minimize painful or maximize pleasurable emotion, the findings discussed earlier on defensive can currently give evidence for dynamic unconscious motivational processes. However, an increasing collection of data from other sources offers even stronger direct support for the existence of unconscious motivation. The best information comes from studies contrasting the two main methods psychologists have used to evaluate motives using the thematic apperception test or TAT through self reports and projective tests. Typically, there is little to no link between these two sorts of measurements, thus showing that conscious and unconscious motives appears to mirror each other with regards to autonomous systems behavior. Despite the lack of correlation, both types of measure, self-reports and projective tests predict relevant behavior too. For instance, over time, evaluations of motivations from DAT stories are significantly more accurate predictors of management or entrepreneurial success than self report measures of thirst for power or achievement. However, if participants are informed that they would be taking an intelligence or achievement exam, their self reported desire for achievement will be a stronger indicator of their effort and success than motivation determined from TAT responses. So, how do we make sense of these findings? A simple but subtle answer to that is when conscious motives are activated, they guide behavior and can override unconscious motive. And when they are not, which is much of the time, unconscious motive guides behavior. Among the evidences that demonstrates the existence of unconscious motivation is the study of Barge in 1997. Barge documented the existence of unconscious motivational processes experimentally. He contends that repetitive use in a certain circumstance leads to motive becoming automatized or activated and carried out with little to no conscious awareness. Because it permits the simultaneous fulfillment of aggressive wants while minimizing the possibility of retaliation, acting in a passive aggressive manner may for some individuals automatize as a usual way of reacting to requests from authority figures. Although this example links automatized motives to a pathological compromise formation, Barge challenges the idea of unconscious processes as largely irrational, arguing that the habitual automatic unconscious motives people develop through repeated experiences in a given situation are often better guides to action than the conscious, presumably rational analysis they might construct of a current instance, which may not be adequately informed by their history of prior learning. An example demonstration for this happened a century ago. So, when Clappery shook hands with an amnesic patient suffering from Korsakoff's disorder, Clappery had concealed a pin between his fingers, which pricked the patient as their hands clasped or intertwined. Upon meeting again, the patient was unable to recognize Clappery but was nonetheless unwilling to shake his hand. Because of her deficits in explicit knowledge, she was unable to describe the reasons for her actions. This just shows how automated a motive can be, even in unconscious awareness.
There are various conclusions that can be derived in the article. First is Freud's primary hypothesis that most of mental life, including thought, feeling, and emotion, is unconscious, was confirmed by his research. Second is researchers do not term a group of cognitive processes as the cognitive, efficient, adaptive, or distressing. Instead, they label it as the unconscious. Third, associative networks implicitly guide behavior. So, free association is helpful because it lets us access these unconscious networks, whether conflict filled or tied to basic desires. Lastly, empirical research may be valuable for evaluating and improving psychoanalytic ideas and models. However, this paper's main point is different because we can now dismiss psychoanalysis' most fundamental claim, which is that unconscious processes are essential because it is unsupported. Clearly, Freud's iceberg is consciousness.